Hola,
Bonjour.
I'm Alejandra and I'm a cloud evangelist.
I'm John, also a cloud evangelist.
And welcome to the very next episode of
What
What
the
the
cloud?
Cloud?
We're getting
So
closer.
close.
I know.
Anyway, you may remember that in the previous episode, we talked to you guys about how to create your AWS account. And we told you that in this episode, we would teach you about Identity Access Management, or IAM for short. So, John, where should we get started with that?
Well, I'm currently logged in inside of my AWS management console. This is where we left you off in the last video. So let me jump into the Identity and Access Management service. I'm going to type IAM right here and go straight into that console. The first thing you see when you go into IAM is the dashboard of IAM. It shows an IAM user signing link at the top that I can customize, as you can see right here. And I can customize this link and then make it like I have right now, what the cloud. This is a link you will use to be able to give that you will need to give to your users. This way, they don't need to remember all of those numbers that will normally replace that what the cloud number at the very top.
So the next step is going to be the security status. So as John is showing us right there on his console homepage, these are the very first steps you're going to have to do at the very beginning before you can do any other work in your account. So you can see that we already have our first green check mark there that it says delete your root access keys because we don't have any access keys at this point. So we're good. Now we will explain a little bit later on what access keys are, but for now let's keep going. So right next on the list, we can see that there's another warning sign, and it says that we need to activate MFA on our root
Wait a
account.
minute, what the cloud is MFA?
Good question, John. Thank you for not assuming where audience does or doesn't know. Okay, so MFA stands for Multifactor Authentication. We should run by an example first to really make sure that the audience can understand what MFA means. So, as you may remember earlier, to log in, you need things such as your username and your password, right? So, you need your username and your password to authenticate. However, does that really prove that you are who you say you are?
Well, isn't a password enough? Like I have a username and password.
But that's actually only one method of authentication. It's only something that you know. But there are, in fact, three different methods of authentication mechanisms, or a factor of authentication. John, why don't we go over those in the whiteboard right now?
Mm-hmm.
So, the first one that John has there is something that you know. But then the second one would be something that you are. And then the third one would be something that you have. Okay, so three factors, right? Know, are, and have.
Well, we already saw that a password is an example of something that you know. So let's write that one down. Password. um, you remember that password, right? You know that password. That's why it goes under you know.
Okay, so let's talk about an example for the next one. Are, something that you are, something that's very personal to you. So this could be something like your fingerprint. It could be something like your retina. It could be your whole face. In fact, it could even be your entire palm, right?
So something that you have needs to be something that you carry with you, like on personally with you, like I don't know, a YubiKey or even a hardware token that gives you some little numbers on it there. Or even a software version of that, like on your phone. It could even be a text that I receive under my phone. It's something that I physically have and that I keep with me.
Right? So only using one of those methods of authentication isn't going to be enough because what if somebody steals John's phone? Or even worse, what if somebody's snooping over John's shoulders and they can see him type out his password? What if they stole John's password? Oh my goodness, what a mess, right? So only using one factor of authentication isn't enough. We need to use two or more factors in combination. So this is something like maybe you want to use your password and your fingerprint. Or maybe you want to use a combination of your password and your phone and some other thing, right? So this all together is what we call MFA, multi-factor authentication.
That's really something that you should set up on your root account. Because with this account, you can do everything you want. This means that if a bad person was able to authenticate as you, they could do everything in your account as well, which would be pretty bad, right?
Absolutely would be awful. Okay, so then let's go back to the next step on the list on the AWS console that we were looking at, right? And we see that next on the list is create an individual IAM user.
Wait a second. So IAM user, what the cloud is an IAM user?
Good question, Jon. So let's definitely not assume that our audience knows or doesn't know what an IAM user is. So a user here basically means your username, right? So let's go back to Jon's whiteboard and maybe let's go ahead and write user on it. So
Please.
think about how when you open your laptop and you want to turn it on again, it first prompts you for your username. It's kind of like a virtual you, a virtual Alejandra, a virtual Jon. So here we see that we're also adding an attribute for user, and we have username, we have password that we just talked about. And Jon, what else could define a virtual you?
Well, what about the best name of all? John, my name.
Hey, how do you know that the very best name of all isn't Alejandra? I guess we're never going to agree on
I
that
know,
one.
right? Yeah.
Uh, okay, fine. But that set aside, what else could define a virtual you,
I
Jon?
don't know. My phone number or maybe my email.
Totally. Okay, so I think we all got it here, right? It makes sense. So we can see now that there are many attributes here, but we won't go over every single one that could possibly exist right now. So, Jon, what else could you use when you go to your laptop to prove that you are who you say you are after entering, for example, your username?
Well, I think I wrote it already, but my password? Is that right?
Totally, Jon. In fact, I think you win 2 gold
Oh
stars.
wait, two of them? Not just one star? I get two? Okay, that's gonna take me. I'm gonna draw that right around me.
All right, Jon. So while Jon is drawing his very well-deserved stars, let's get back to business. We just saw that there is indeed another way to prove that you are who you say you are. And what was that again, Jon?
Um, was it multi-factor authentication?
Exactly, right? So now you can know who you are. But we're actually still missing a huge piece right here. Because now the question becomes, what are you authorized to do? We know who you are now, but maybe you're not authorized to do anything on an account just yet. Maybe there's only certain services you can activate on it. Or maybe you can use anything on the account, right? We don't know. It could be everything. But regardless, this is what we call authorization. So both authentication and authorization work together. Okay, Jon. Now let's pretend that you're a developer on another team and you want to ask for permissions in that team to have access to certain things on that account. How does that work?
Well, I'm part of a team or a group of people. So let's write group here. So, in fact, the term, well, it's really group, right? So by being part of a group, I want to get some authorization. So you can assign authorization directly to me, to the user, or you can assign authorization to the group. And then me being part of that group, I get the exact same authorization. In fact, at assigning authorization to the group and then assigning the user to the group is the right way to do it.
But Jon, why can't I just associate the permissions that I have directly to my user?
Well, what if you need to modify the permissions for everyone inside of that group or that team? It's a lot of work to change individual permissions for an entire team. What if you're joining a new team? Now, someone has to remove the old permission plus add new permissions, and then what if the person doing this completely forgets or adds too many? This is why
Hmm.
using groups to manage those makes life way easier on everyone.
Oh, well, that definitely makes sense. Okay, so we're not quite done with this yet. Let's go ahead and add some real names that we would actually use here at AWS inside the awesome whiteboard that Jon is working with us today. So a user here is an IAM user. So Jon is going to go ahead and update that. And then our group would be an IAM group. And similarly, these are the authorizations again, the permissions, and these together are called an IAM policy. So, with me so far? Sounds good?
Yep.
Okay, let's keep going. So, under a group, we could have a name, right? That'll make things easier. Under a username, you can see that we already have, under user, we already have things like username and password. And again, these are the username and the password that you're going to need to use to be able to connect to your AWS account via the management console. However, if you want to use the command line or SDKs, which we brought up briefly in the previous episode, you're certainly welcome to do so. All right, but even with those, you're still going to need something that we call an access key and a secret key.
Wait, what the cloud is an access key and a secret key?
Good question, Jon. So you remember at the very beginning of the episode, we told you all we would be coming back to this, right? We don't want to assume that you do or don't know. So the good news is that it's actually going to be pretty simple to explain this. All right, so an access key is like a username, and a secret key is, for example, your password. And that is what the AWS CLI or an SDK would use to authenticate you. It's very similar to having just your username and your password, but it's just being used differently within those tools.
Now, let's talk about what happens if you have a special user. That user that wants to connect to AWS. It's not really a human. It's actually a machine, like a computer or a server. Well, let's just go and draw that server. That server, it's trying to connect to AWS. So you could create an IAM user and assign that user towards that computer itself, and then you could put a username and a password toward that server. But that's not really what you will do. You will probably only give an access key and a secret key towards that machine, because the server itself, your application, is not going to talk to AWS via the GUI. It's going to talk to it via the AWS it's not going to talk to it over the management console or via that GUI. It's going to talk to it over the CLI and then the SDK. So we already said how to do that. That will be to take these credentials, the access key and the secret key, and then go and assign them towards that server. Problem is, where are you going to store those credentials? Storing them directly on the server itself is problematic. It's almost as bad as, I don't know, if you watch the last episode, my sticky note with the password right on it, right? Well, in a similar way, anyone that has access to the server also has access to the access key and the secret key.
So I agree with you, Jon. That does sound pretty bad, something not advisable. But what about when we have more than one server? Should we have one user allocated per each server? And should all the servers have the same secret key?
Well, both of those don't sound right, because it will make
Ugh.
things even more difficult when we
Mm.
want to rotate or change a secret key from time to time. And always keeping the same secret key is definitely not right. So we can't store, I just said not storing the secret key on the server, and we also will have problems with rotation. We don't really want to store keys on those servers. That's why this special user or machine user that I was referring to can't be an IAM user. We need something else.
Okay, how about an IAM role?
I think this can just do it. Do you want to explain what IAM roles are to our audience?
Good point. Thank you for reminding me, Jon. So, first of all, I'm going to ask you, audience, to forget any other preconceptions you may have of the definition of this term. All right? You need to do that because otherwise you could get confused, and we don't want that. So, for now, we're going to pretend that a role is similar to a hat that a server has to wear. You can see that Jon drew a very beautiful server right there, right? And so now he's adding a beautiful complementary hat to it because once that server that Jon has is wearing that hat, temporary credentials will be applied to it. And these are what we've been talking about, the access key and the secret key. This is what's going to allow for you to run an application on that server, which will then be able to make calls to AWS.
Like we explained earlier, this role provides the who, the authentication piece. When the application on the server makes the call to AWS, it tells AWS who it is by using these credentials that it just got by having that little hat associated with it. For AWS to know what authorization this role has, it also uses an IAM policy.
Okay, awesome. So we finally created and figured out how to make an individual user. So we should actually head back to the AWS Management Console and let's get back to that security status page that we've been looking at. Okay, cool. So we're at the security status page within our IAM dashboard, and these are the things that we want to check off to make sure that they all have a green access check mark right next to them before you start doing anything on your account. So we've talked so far about MFA. We discussed how to create IAM users and having those users within groups. So the next one would be, as you can see right here, applying an IAM policy, the very last one on the list.
To do that, we click on our account settings, so right here on the left, and then clicking on Set Password Policy. The way that works is you can place a password policy that says how many characters are required at a minimum, what characters are required for password, allow users to change their own password, and even set a password expiration to force users to change their password. So that's a lot of things that you can do with those passwords. In the end, we will now be done with that entire security status.
Woo! Awesome! Okay, so today we talked about a lot of things, right? We talked about how to get everything ready and lined up in your security status page within the IAM dashboard. We explained to you what multi-factor authentication is. We talked about IAM users, groups, roles, policies, even password policies. And whew, I don't know, Jon, but I'm pretty sure that's a wrap.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us in today's episode of What the Cloud. In the next episode, we will talk about object storage and the Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3 for short. We'll see you there. See ya.
Bye.